Welcome everyone to the Script and Archetypes online course. Today is February 22nd, 2015. Today's class is going to be on the archetypes of Capricorn and Cancer. And we're here with Daniel Giamario and Castell. And so Cayelin, I'm going to pass this on to you as the presenter.
So it's going to tell me to accept something right here. Yeah. Show my screen. All right.
There we go.
So you're seeing my screen now?
Yes.
Okay. Actually, I want to close that down and that and that. I have a lot of things open. All right. Okay. So Daniel, do you want to start or? Okay.
All right, this is, we're now moving into new territory. We've looked at the script material, the foundation of this way of looking at the chart. And now we're going to begin our investigation of the 12 mystery schools. And just as a reminder, of course, we're never here talking about sun signs, So it's really the 12 mystery schools themselves, and we're beginning with Cancer and Capricorn. And I have a lot that I want to share with you about these two. I sure want to thank everyone who decided to participate in the homework. Actually some really good questions came out of what people have shared. We also have this matrix that shows the Cancer, who has where Capricorn and Cancer shows up. I found it very intriguing that we have 4 Cancer ascendants and
it's like 5. Because I put
yeah, 5, right? Yeah, and then ascendants. Sorry, yeah, and 3 Capricorn ascendants. And the reason we started with these, Cancer, Capricorn, and then followed by Aries, Libra, is that we've placed them within the householder category. Just a couple of quick words about that. My background, going back into the 70s, was in Eastern forms of spirituality, TM and a couple other organizations. And the Indian approach often uses this distinction between a renunciate and a householder. And so this householder thing was always something we used, and it was a term that made a lot of sense to me, and I discovered as I went around that it didn't necessarily mean the same thing to other people. Householder, does that mean you have to own a home? Actually, it's the way we are perceiving it, and in order to really distinguish what we mean by this, actually my wife came up with another term that would also capture it, which was culture bearer, householder or culture bearer, and it's the 4 of the 12 mystery schools. 4 out of 12, in mainstream astrology known as the cardinal signs, which hold the world together from one generation to the next. They're the mystery schools that create a link point between past generations and future generations, and they're not renunciate approaches, meaning they're not individuals that are choosing to distance themselves from secular or being involved in the I think in many ways it's the category that is usually in Asia or in India referred to as karma yoga, very much strongly in the world in a variety of different ways. And over this class and the next class, we're going to be seeing the 4 schools historically that have held the world together from one generation to the next. The basic stock characters that show up throughout history. There will be something that will get to you probably in time for the next class, which I allude to in the video. If you had the opportunity to see the video or to listen to the recorded material, the MP3 material. I don't always do it in a most systematic way when I do those presentations, and what it involves is looking at what is actually in every mystery school. I mean, every mystery school is going to have features, contours. One thing which I'm hopeful we'll have a chance to discuss here today, and which will be a feature of all of the mystery school classes, would be what I call the minefields, or the shadow that is identified and associated with each of the mystery schools historically. We also want to look at each of these schools historically the way any magi or shamanic astrologer would look at these mystery schools, which is to always take into account three things simultaneously if we can do it. One is to tune into what was really, really good about the mystery school previously. And there are, we have to reframe everything now, of course, but there are still elements from the past that are useful. So we look back to see what was great in the past. And then we establish what the actual essence is of it eternally, throughout all time, and then to be able to be open to see what the new material coming in is, which would be that mystery school that will serve the future. And this is something that in the tradition of the Magi, but also the Merlin, the tradition of the Merlin, male or female versions of the Merlin, they had to do that. They had to keep track of the past and be open to what the beautiful new stuff coming in would be. And if you happen to be familiar with these stories, the ultimate story here being that of the Merlin himself, who ended up being criticized heavily by the old traditions because he was embracing some of what was good about Christianity. But he was also very, very much disliked by the Christians because he still was, connected to a lot of the old Druidic mysteries and, the Neolithic mysteries, the older traditions of as above, so below, and other things like that. So we're in that position now at the turning of the ages, and this is what I mean by essence versus content. So there's going to be a universal essence to what is the purpose of that mystery school. And here we're going to be looking at Cancer and Capricorn, of course. But what is the actual essence of its contribution? And then to perceive that there's a difference between that and what the specific contents are. What patriarchy does with Cancer is different than what, say, a matriarchal culture would do with Cancer, or what the Neolithic times would do with Cancer. So it's still the essence of Cancer or Capricorn, but there would be different content. One of the reasons why I love to begin with looking at the so-called householder or culture bearer mystery schools is because it's within these four that we have the greatest confusion, I think, between the difference between content and essence. So a lot of times when people think they know what Cancer is, they're only referring to, say, what Cancer has been in the last 200 years, or the way our parents did it, or something like that, rather than tuning into what actually the essence of Cancer would be, or Capricorn. And this then gets into our historical analysis of all of this, which is what I like to refer to as the Hall of Records. So if we can imagine, say, each of these 12 mystery schools as actually being a university, or being having a building, or having grounds, having certain trees, having certain terrain, certain landscape, a certain aesthetic to it, that each of the schools would look differently and would have inside of that that place of learning a hall of records that would describe the whole history of what that mystery school has been on the planet. And that expands our view to actually put us in a position where we can actually have a renaissance, to go back to what has been beautiful about the past, to inspire our vision now of the creation of new approaches, new content for what has been the eternal essence of Cancer or Capricorn. You know, it's a lot of times it's easier to perceive the radical nature of the other mystery schools than it is these four, because these are the ones that are more, quote, conservative and traditional. In fact, words like traditional and conservative are generally applied to Cancer and Capricorn. I must make the interjection here, though, that when I say traditional and conservative, I'm certainly not talking about political conservative, but rather that larger sense that that would be understood by Native Americans. You know, we make no decisions save for the benefit of the generations to follow, and we honor the wisdom of the elders, of those that have gone before. So these are some of the overall general ideas that I wanted to put on the table here first as we get more deeply into this. Also, a reminder here that the reason we begin with the script material before we get into the actual deeper essence and content of the 12 mystery schools is because the mystery schools themselves, in and of themselves, are not good or bad, right or wrong. They're the 12 authentic schools that contribute to the planet, to human beings, to global humanity. They're all equally valid, but they can be applied on your own individual chart in different ways. For some people, it's their past identity, their lineage identity, which is not being made wrong, but is being transformed into something else. It's sort of like letting go of that as being the central feature and moving somewhere else. And for other people, like those who have the ascendant, or Venus and Mars, or Mercury in Cancer or Capricorn, then these are statements of intent. You know, it's going into a territory, which includes the minefields that are in that territory. Just to be clear, when I say minefields, mine is in a landmine, not mine meaning mine. All right, a minefield, or and we could also think of it as the shadow, or the mistakes, or we could even say the honest mistakes that have been associated with these different schools historically over time at different time periods in history. And often when an individual is working on something new, as everyone in the class, let's say, who has the ascendant in Cancer or Capricorn, or Venus, Mercury, Moon, sorry, not Moon, Venus, Mercury, or Mars in Cancer or Capricorn, it's a new thing. It's like a beginner place. It's investigating something new, which almost always includes having to confront or to go through where the shadow of that particular mystery school has been, where we find it at this time period in history, with the culture we're born into, the family we're born into, the time in history we're born into. So those are just some of the preliminary comments that I want to make here. We want to include as a homework a project for later classes about how you can participate in this material regarding the difference between essence and content, exploring where the shadow or the minefields are, mystery schools, and then even those of you that are really inspired who have imagery come through and they want to capture it, to think of what the Hall of Records are with it, and then maybe even to project into the future and imagine what this mystery school would be doing in the world we could imagine. That we could, in our imagination, we could see the kind of world we wanted to live in. The new Cancer, the new Capricorn, a new set of contents, but operating off of the same essence, the same purpose of why that school exists in the first place. So that's just a way of opening our our investigation here by looking at it this way. Cayelin, anything you would like to add to these opening comments?
I think it's all great what you've been sharing, and I don't know what else you have in mind, but I'm wondering if you want to address Nancy's question about Cancer.
Yes, put that up. Because that allows us to get more deeply into some of the nuances of this.
So just so you see, she is Cancer rising, and then her question is, or she talks about contents versus essence. The essence of Cancer is the giving of nourishment, comforting, protecting the vulnerable, being a container and a holder of nourishment. There's healing in Cancer's essence, tenderness, the will to support, give what's needed. Cancer connects us to the wisdom of the mother. I have a question about something in the handbook under Cancer training and challenges on the path. It says, yes, Cancer training happens in 2 phases. The first phase is the same for all water signs, and that is to feel the full range of their feelings. The second phase for Cancer involves serious, committed, responsible giving of love to progeny, projects, or seeds until the seeds or projects reach maturity. And then she highlighted this piece, which says, and this is in the handbook, this is why Cancer training does not ultimately include the development of a personal or individual identity other than what comes up through the connection to their children and other family members. And she said that it makes her feel uncomfortable and
limiting. Okay, so this actually brings up at least 3 things for us to talk about. One is that Cancer and Capricorn are 2 of the 4 mystery schools that are in the category of being givers. You know, their whole orientation is activities associated with function and giving. So like Virgo, Pisces, Cancer, Capricorn, and we're looking at Cancer and Capricorn now. It's function based. Even if Cancer or Capricorn is powerful and independent, strong, and even egoic, the purpose of the mystery school is holding it together for others. I mean, so it's a giver kind of thing. That's the first thing I wanted to bring up. The second point would be is that I was very strongly influenced by a book by Jean Boland, Goddesses in Every Woman. And in that book, she makes a distinction between she describes 3 categories of goddesses, 3 categories of the feminine principle. One category was which was the most mysterious. I mean, it's the alchemical one, which is the Tarian or courtesan one. We won't get into that one right now. Then there would be the Amazonian one, the kind of warrior Amazon, which more recently today is called solar feminine, which is featuring autonomy, sovereignty. We call it in shamanic astrology often signs of self-interest. Self-interest. That doesn't mean selfish, but where the identification is with ourselves, not really with our connection so much with others. So the third category is where we're moving toward here. She had a third category which is called the vulnerable goddesses, and whose identity comes from their connections. So in the case of Cancer, and to a certain extent Capricorn, but the epitome of this would be Cancer, our identity is based upon our connection with clan, with family, with our children. And what she meant by vulnerable was the fact that, not to make it mean less or weak or insufficient, but describing its actual essence. And in this case, we're speaking of the essence of Cancer, that Cancer does not know what Cancer is unless it has its connection to initially family, clan, caste, clan, country, and so on. And as most of you would recognize, that when we're redreaming this, when we're expanding it into the future, then it's a connection to all of humanity. It's a connection to global humanity as a family. So it's the essence of it is its connection to the members of the tribe, the members of the clan, the members of the family. So therefore, there's nothing about this that would be limiting. So what happens is that if a person is identified with cancer, whether from the past or whether they're working on it now, certainly the individual will develop strength in order to carry out the task, to carry out the mission and purpose statement of that mystery school, which is to provide nourishment to those you identify with as your family, whether that's the whole world, whether that's your country, or whether that's just your children. And even in describing it this way, we can see in here where the shadow or where the minefield of cancer would have been originally. I'm sort of diverging off of specifically your question here, but it seems to emerge here at this point, which would be that a more limited view of cancer, it's still the essence of cancer, but it's a different content, would be the downside of cancer that has been understood throughout history, the clannishness of it. Or like the idea that, like, I love my children, I will fight and die for my children, but I don't have any other children. Or how this then applies to a more limited view of nationalism or patriotism. We are number one. I love my country, and we are without question better than any other country, so we're only going to be identified with us. And I'm not just putting America down here. It's like this is even more extreme in other parts of the world, particularly the Chinese culture historically. It's like we have a set of rules, laws for our clan, and then there's a different set of rules and laws if you're Chinese. And then, of course, there's a completely rules and laws if you're some other human, and actually the Jewish culture originally was actually well known for that. It's like the laws against usury only applied to other Jews. Now, you could charge whatever interest you wanted if you weren't. You see, so these are examples of how cancer had been explored before, and we're trying to dream it forward. Now, I'm hopeful in these comments here, and if Nancy is listening, I invite her to either respond to what I'm describing here, or if she wants to come on the screen too and talk, that's great. But I'm just noticing another part of her question here. What you've described here in your third paragraph, so I have cancer rising, but don't seem to have a lot of personal family feeling. It's cancer rising, so I feel little connection to my small blood family, never felt I'm seen by them, no ill will, distant, blessed, being connected to my partner's sisters. It's a new thing. The Aries moon would not have been connected to that. And actually this brings up another thing I've noticed in the years that I've been doing this work, that people with cancer rising in particular, and definitely Capricorn rising also, it's these two, have in some ways the most difficult predicament, if it's your rising sign, than a lot of other folks. And that's because most everyone born in recent times with Cancer or Capricorn rising will have experienced the dysfunction of the traditional ways of doing family. Now, certainly the devil's advocate would say, it's all, so did I, and I don't have Cancer or Capricorn rising. I mean, a lot of people have experienced the dysfunctionalism of the ways in which Cancer and Capricorn have been on the planet recently. Okay, but it's the Cancer or Capricorn risings that it matters the most to, because it's the objective, the intention of Cancer or Capricorn rising to figure out, to be committed to making it better. To actually be, in most ways, in most times, in many examples, more connected to the essence of Cancer than their forebears who believed they were totally into Cancer and were, maintaining the ways of Cancer, but were attached to content, not the essence. Which is like the whole concept of nuclear family being, isn't obviously that's the only way to do family, right? Anybody who's done any research into anthropology and global understanding of ancient culture knows that there have been hundreds of ways that human beings have organized family. And who are we to say that there's only one way to do it? I would go so far to say that the only thing I'm sure of as far as the new the new content of Cancer, not the essence, but the new content of Cancer, is that it's got to include the whole planet. The tribalism, the clannishness, the my country, by the way, I'm not particularly aspiring for one world government, so I'm not a one worlder in that sense. I mean, I certainly am into the honoring of the regional areas and certain specific characteristics of your own tribe or your own group. But the essence of Cancer is providing nourishment to the seeds until they grow to what for them would be their maturity. And I think that the future Cancer is the whole world, not just my country or my children and so on. So yes, I welcome.
Yeah, I think she's not on because let me just see. There is something in the chat here from Katie. She says, I've heard the image of bees being connected to Cancer, and sometimes that resonates for me more than the crab. Is now an okay time to ask about the relevance and origins of bees being connected to Cancer? She said, sorry, I didn't send in the question earlier.
Well, first of all, there can be a huge over-identification with the later Greek and then sometimes Egyptian imagery that is projected onto the star groups. So, I mean, to me, you can get some stuff from crab, but the rest of it, I mean, it may or may not have anything much to do with the essence of the mystery school. We're looking at the sign Cancer as it is understood as one of the 12 mystery schools as measured off from the spring equinox. In Egypt, it wasn't a crab; it was a scarab beetle. Also, for those that look at the sky, you will know that that if you look into that region of the sky, there's virtually no bright stars there. You can pretty much project anything you want into that region. What comes up for me would be is that at this time in history, the sign of Cancer happens to be aligned with a star group that is like a big beehive. There's a cluster of stars that if you look at it, with the binoculars, it looks like a big beehive. So there maybe there's that. The other thought would be is that Cancer is certainly being one of the main mystery schools associated with the feminine, and in Crete and in other parts of the matriarchal world, the bee was one of the prime symbols for the sacred feminine, for the goddess. So that's what I know about that.
I'm wondering, well, the other thing too, I think it's like if you do think about bees, they do live more in community. Mm-hmm. So even if we take out the whole thing about the constellations, and I don't know, do crabs live in community? Do they have family? Do they, they can't? So it's just interesting to contemplate that imagery.
Another thought I had, Cayelin, is that I have had the experience over time of having done sessions for men that have a strong Cancer constellation, maybe Mars in Cancer, maybe Cancer Moon, and these guys more often than not become bodybuilders or become they get involved in what would appear to be macho professions, the firemen and the policemen and so on. And while there may be an element to that second example of really wanting to protect your community, and I've seen some of the most loving and amazing firemen and policemen have that Cancer archetype, what I'm referring here to more, though, is the fear that men who have that strong Cancerian archetype, the fear that they're going to be perceived of as being emotional, sensitive, soft, and vulnerable, so they end up wanting to hide that while inside their... Huh?
They're building a tough exterior, kind of like the crab. That's what you're referring to, right?
Yes, yes. So that would be one thought that comes up about how crab would apply here. But that takes us far afield from what we are suggesting as the actual essence of the Cancer mystery school. I might
and
have...
for people to know is that actually most of the crab now is overlaid by Leo.
Mm-hmm.
So the sign of Leo, that because of the precession and the way the signs move across the constellation, so the season of Leo is now more connected to the crab than the sign of Cancer, which now overlays the sign of the twin, or the constellation of the twins. So
I wouldn't care all that much about the crabness of the mystery school of Cancer.
Well, I'm wondering if you really answered her question, because she's saying that she says that Cancer training does not ultimately include the development of personal or individual identity except as being connected to progeny and family.
Right.
And I would say that the reason she's objecting to this, she wants to know exactly what that means, because she's an Aries moon. So to not have personal sense of identity, an individual identity, would be something Aries moon would object to.
Totally, totally. But I was trying to answer the question with regards to the essence of Cancer is its connections to others, in this case family. The analogy here would be like with Libra. We could say the same thing with the Libra Mystery School, that in and of itself, Libra has nothing to do with the development of the individual self. It has to do with how one is personally connecting to another on a more horizontal plane. Cancer Capricorn is more hierarchical or vertical. So the essence of the Mystery School is in its relationship to these others, which is why Jean Bolin then used the expression the vulnerable goddesses, where the partner knows itself because they're a partner, not because they're autonomous and independent. But I agree with you, Cayelin, entirely that a man or a woman with an Aries moon, where there's even if they're a protector of their family, what makes Aries powerful is that it is not its boundaries. It has a solid, clear sense of what itself is. While with Cancer, that is not the case. It's not part of the training for Cancer to develop that, because it would be counterproductive to the function of that particular mystery school. We don't want to have the mother thinking of themselves before they think of the baby, as it were. But you can see how this can go could go wrong. I'm thinking of the thing that I'll probably do a survey on this some point. You know, if anybody has gotten on an airplane, when they're talking about that if you lose oxygen, you know, and then the mask comes down, and make sure you put it on yourself before you put it on your. Well, I bet certain types of people, well, what? You know, of course I would put it on my child's first, you know. That's a really good distinction between Aries and Cancer, I guess.
Yeah, you know that, and from the Cancer moon people that I have known, it is so difficult for them to have a sense of personal or individual identity. So perhaps that's what they're working on, but they, you know, from their lineage, that was not something that they developed. Not that they didn't have an individual sense of self, you know, to some degree, but it would not be the leading edge, you know. So
they would have a sense of self, which is I am the person who takes care of these other people.
Right, exactly. That's their identity. And so if this is something a person is learning about, and they come from a lineage, say Leo or Aries or Scorpio or something that has a very strong sense of its own identity, this is really new territory for them to learn how to have.
So back to Nancy. The first paragraph says, including the development of a personal or individual identity, except as being connected to progeny or family, and then she says that she did not feel that connection. Well, most all people that I've known with Cancer rising, one of the things that they most know they're doing in their life is looking for healthy family, looking for one's tribe, looking for one's community, looking for one's healthy connection of where a person can both give and receive nourishment in a way that's healthy.
It looks like in Nancy's case that it didn't even occur to her, as she was living more from her Aries moon, as not ever playing with dolls, never having a pet, never having anything to take care of. And then her biological alarm went off, and then her Saturn returned, and she just, then she had children.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very. We certainly can't say any of these things are 100%, but so many women, and you can attest to this too, Cayelin, who have the fire moons.
Yeah.
Would identify with the tomboy kind of thing.
Right. So then she goes on to say she is the mother of 3 children, and that was very important to her, and that being responsible to them changed her life, and that each became kind, aware humans who have something to offer the world. She loves them deeply, but she doesn't derive that much of who she is from her connection to them now that they're grown. And in fact, it's kind of annoying when one of the first things I'm asked is, how are your kids? So women are so often seen through the lens of their motherhood, it does become a woman's identity to many people. This may be what I'm reacting to in that sentence.
Right.
I believe that human being, a sense of identity, individuality is necessary, not attachment to ego, but we have to know who we are. Even if we're givers, we have to have the wisdom to discern between ourselves and others.
Yeah, so whenever I work with someone who has a Cancer moon, I mean, almost without exception, what is it that they're most working on here in the current life is the development of their own self, their own boundaries, not to overgive or overconnect everybody else as far as being a giver. That's what they're working on here now. And so what actually Nancy is also bringing out for all of us here is the minefields of being Cancer rising, which is that more so than any other mystery schools, Cancer is the one that, and it's kind of interesting we're beginning with this one. I mean, sometimes this is the last one we do. It's like, it's more than any other rising sign, everybody assumes they know what it means. It's obviously this is woman is mother. And that's where we get really get confused between the essence of and content. So there's a projection about what motherhood itself is supposed to be looking like, and obviously an Aries moon, it may rebel against that assumption that it's supposed to be a particular way. Certainly not our mother or our grandmother's version of it. It's something else, and so that a woman like Nancy, with a chart like Nancy's, her objective, we can say it's on her to-do list to actually be a mother and to explore Cancer, absolutely, but in a new way, to be exploring the new content, which would then allow her to certainly have the right to rebel against what's projected onto her by what the culture believes is true about it.
And then, of course, she concludes by saying perhaps family includes connection to the family of humankind or to the earth itself as our mother. And she feels that at the turning of the ages, Cancer training is much more inclusive and widely healing, which is basically what you've been also saying.
Totally. Yep.
And if we look at her chart, she not only does she have the Aries moon, she has Venus and Jupiter and Mercury and Aries. She is not leaving Aries completely behind. That has to also be incorporated into her Cancer rising. And she has this Scorpio job, so she's bringing in a whole other level of intensity as a result. So it's not. So the thing that we need to remember when we're looking at this mystery school is if it's our rising, so that we need to incorporate the whole entire script, as an understanding, and so that makes modifications on that. So of course she's going to be somebody who's going to continue to need to have a personal identity as she.
And so I would suggest that she would be a warrior Amazon to be committed to developing the new and more healthy and more global and version of what Cancer Rising can be here at this time period in history.
Yep. So if somebody's wondering if Nancy's developing her Cancer Rising by being the nurturer of her 3 children in the past, and now that her children are grown, she's continuing her own personal development. So this is the way we rewrite the manual.
There's an ingredient there that's really important, which has to do with phases of life. That often, if a woman does have children, and by the way, this is not just about women. I mean, men with a lot of cancer will go through exactly the same kind of situation. The role for a man, cancer, is not just to be patriarchal father; it's to be the nourishment of the children also. You know, I mean, we don't have to just have this be a gender issue. But what I'm getting to here is the fact that what does one do when the youngest is grown? I mean, since the definition, the specific Cancerian definition is commitment to the seed until it grows to its maturity. Well, different parts of the world, different time periods in history, what is that, 12, 15, 18, 21? If you happen to be in parts of the world like where I'm living now, the Philippines, it doesn't ever end. I mean, it's, you know, like a person gets married, and individuation means you live not in the same room, but one wall away. You know, I mean, it's those family connections hardly never individuate. There's so many different ways. But in America, and for many of the people I work with, so what happens when the youngest is 18 or 21? That's a really big turning point. And if a person has Cancer Rising, one option would be to reinvent, to breathe, to take further what grandmother would be. You know, what would be the healthy way of providing nourishment to one's progeny, lineage, beyond nuclear family here, of course. But that's only one possibility. Many women and men, when they reach this particular stage, realize that what Cancer Rising would mean, and this would particularly apply to those that don't have children, didn't have a family, household, or stage. If it's Cancer Rising, then at a certain point arises still the need to come up with something that is the essence of Cancer Rising. It doesn't literally have to mean having children. It could be that you are the teacher of thousands of children. You know, it could mean that you are a therapist with a particular orientation toward your clients. I mean, a person can be a therapist and do it in the style of any of the different mystery schools. The Cancerian way of doing it looks different than, say, the Virgo way of doing it. So you're providing nourishment to your clients. And this brings up something that will apply to both Cancer and Capricorn. The hierarchical nature of it, or the vertical nature of it. And this is one of the biggest differences we're going to see between these two mystery schools and what we do next class, Aries Libra, which is more horizontal. So, for example, the Cancerian or Capricornian role is like parent to child, teacher to student, therapist to client, spiritual teacher to chela. It's an authentic vertical relationship, but you can also see built into that is where its shadow can be. We don't want to have it be like the 80-year-old mother who continually talks about her 60-year-old baby. It's like she's afraid she's going to lose her job, you know? Or this happens all the time when you're in a profession that's hierarchical as a teacher or a healer, where you get attached to to the ones you're helping. And in a sense, you don't want to lose your job, and so it's hard to let them go. And these are the individuation points, but it's also the point of shifting levels to the next level of what Cancer rising would be. And that comes up when we have determined whether or not the seed is now mature. Whether it's a garden, whether it's taking care of a dog, until which has a certain it's not going to be the same. Its maturity is different than a child, but you commit to that pet. That's the different. That's a certain cancers commit to a pet in a different way than say a Sagittarian would.
I can speak to that. So Rhonda is saying that she's really resonating with Nancy's question, and she has 3 children who have seriously been her absolute greatest teachers. Not easy, but powerful. There are so many years between their births, 3 only children, so having them so far apart that they're like raising only children. She says there's been times when I've wondered how long I have to be Rhonda the parent, not in a selfish way. And Rhonda's the one who also just discovered she's Leo rising. So, in fact, let me find her chart so we can see what's going on here with that. Yeah, Rhonda. Here we go. So, who's also an Aries moon, by the way.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Of course,
so here, right. The way I usually understand this kind of a script, and this, of course, is in light of the fact that we now know it's Leo rising. And sometimes when a person discovers, well, is this something we just discovered, or because we had a mistake, or did she just find this out?
She just discovered it herself, and she was Capricorn. She thought she was Capricorn rising, and then with it, and basically it was written on her birth certificate that she was born AM, and that was a mistake because she found her hospital bracelets and it said PM, and her mother confirmed that it was PM.
Yeah, so just to risk on this one, but this is usually what I would say to a client, is that particularly since it's Leo rising, the life phase of being a parent, where you were the mother role and really getting into it and finding great value in it, was a magnificent way of discovering, of experiencing Venus in Pisces. I mean, Venus in Pisces is so radically different than Aries moon. It's developing qualities. I mean, we'll get to Pisces later, but Pisces is another one of the feeling function givers. If we had to say, in many ways, which mystery school is more similar to Cancer than any, I mean, Pisces has a lot of similar features. So it's like developing the Piscean qualities of providing nourishment and tuning in into others' needs and so on. But gee, when you're Leo rising, I mean, this gives a fabulous set of instructions to, hey, if you've learned how to do that, I mean, if it's objectively true that you have provided nourishment and have found value in it, great. I'm looking at the picture of Rhonda at the moment, so throwing your arms up in the air there. Yes, you did it, and so and so now get on with Leo rising, and now it's more about you. Right. So that would be my answer to it. Is that, yeah, it's like risk doing something that your mind or others might say, geez, isn't it selfish? Well, gee, it's about time to grow into something that's more of self-interest for you.
Right. So, yeah, and no wonder she, of course, resonates with Nancy's question as an Aries moon with Venus and Pisces.
Right, indeed, indeed.
With that, such a similarity there, yeah. So there's no more comments or questions in the chat at this point. So.
Well, we've spent a lot of the time so far actually looking at Cancer. Maybe I think maybe Capricorn needs a bit more attention here. Although that I think what I've emphasized so far is that there's a fair amount of stuff they have in common, both being culture bearer, householder. When we look at, say, the history of astrology over the last 100 years, for a long time it appeared they were trying, it seemed clear. Capricorn is father and Cancer is mother. And then they would identify the 10th house with father and the 4th house with mother. I really desire, and I was inspired by Liz Green here. She basically makes the same point about this. You want to move beyond the cultural definition of those particular roles. There's any number of families where actually the man is more the provider of nourishment, and the woman is more the sort of the teacher of structure. So we're not like trying to say it's about gender here, but the distinction is Cancer is operating from feeling, from tuning in. It's like the mammalian heart, from a place of providing nourishment because you tune in on a feeling function level. And Cayelin, in your beginning module, you went into the distinctions between the elements. Well, Capricorn is an earth sign, and it's the version of earth that has to do with structure. It's like, what's the purpose of Capricorn? It's to bring spirit into matter in order to manage it. So therefore, Capricorn has to do with the operating manual. I mean, that's why it's identified with Saturn. I find it particularly interesting that I think it's tomorrow, tomorrow, that we are in Saturn square Sun. So I mean, so anytime we talk about Capricorn, there's that presence of Saturn, right? But we're certainly not turning Saturn into some kind of a devil or some kind of a version of Saturn that's been dominant over the last 2,000 years. Same thing with Capricorn. We've expanded Capricorn to perceive it as a female, as a feminine elder energy. Of what really does sustain the world, the real concern for the generations to follow, as opposed to the unbelievably well-known shadow of Capricorn that exists today. I mean, beyond just putting it all in the category of hierarchical patriarchy, I mean, Capricorn is the epitome of that shadow, without question. But also, corporate structure, only being concerned about the quarterly profit, stuff like that, which is a complete abomination and aberration of original Capricorn, which is a concern for really what does work over a long period of time. What's positive about the word conservative, shall we say? I mean, so this brings up an interesting issue. And this is how the Capricorn Mystery School works. It also will give us an illustration. Is the difference between whether your moon is there or whether you have something new on your chart moving in the direction of Capricorn. You've heard us speak in the past about Capricorn and Cancer being about a concern for the 7 generations to follow. The Native Americans would say, we make no decision save for the benefit of the 7 generations to follow. And usually the matriarchal and groups would be the women who would be making those decisions. The 13, the indigenous grandmothers, the circle of grandmothers, and so on. But the other side of the equation, we find in the Bible statements like, and the sins of the father are delivered upon the 7 generations. Yeah. So it's generally the purpose of those with strong Capricorn to get the joke there that they may think they're the ones that are supposed to carry on what's worked in the past, when in fact they're the ones to make the assessment of what doesn't work, to cut the ties from the stuff that is the sicknesses from the past, and to then create new ways. And from a place of responsibility, it's like completely rewiring our whole understanding of responsibility. We could say it's not our father's responsibility, it's not our grandparents'. We now have the responsibility to come up with a way that really works on the planet at this point that honors the earth. So, and I guess if we're talking about the whole idea of the Hall of Records, of all the mystery schools, with the possible exception, I'm sure the Gemini mystery school is going to want to say, no, wait a minute, we have the bigger library. But the Capricorn Hall of Records would be the entire recorded history of what human beings have done up to this time. I mean, it's the way Capricorn comes up with what to do is by looking to see what's happened before, and then they will say, well, what's worked in the past, and then wait a minute, none of these things that have worked in the past are working now, or oh, well, maybe only 1 of 10 is. Well, let's keep that, but then be willing to take responsibility with coming up with for the ways that will work. Another primary distinction between the Cancer Mystery School and the Capricorn one, and this relates also to the difference in the elements, is that it has been said, and I think there's truth to this, that of all the mystery schools, the one that is the least personal is Capricorn. But if we can have some compassion and understand why that would be so. I mean, the function of Capricorn is to hold it together in a responsible way for others. To have it be too personal could distract from the purpose of that particular tribe. You can see so many versions of this that we know about. Like if you're the captain of the ship, you have to be prepared to go down with the ship, and you get everybody else off. If you're a therapist, they still train therapists not to shake hands with their clients in Europe in some of the formal trainings. To remain, in a sense, hierarchical, which has its own shadow side. But I guess what I'm trying. You can see how different that is from Cancer, which is not impersonal. It's deeply personal, but in a vertical way. You love your child in a different way than you love your wife, hopefully. I mean, that's one of the problems that can happen if there's too much Cancer in a personal relationship. Then the personal relationship, or Capricorn too, whether it's Cancer or Capricorn in a personal relationship, is that if your role is simply to teach the other person or to caretake the other person, nothing kills eros or intimacy faster than that. And that can work either way. You can be in a relationship because you need to be taken care of, or you're in a relationship because you need to be the one who is the one taking care of the other. Your function is, gee, I get to be the person who holds it together for my wife and family. And again, this is all designed to tease out the difference between the authentic essence and what we've assumed to be the content. Certainly there must be some Capricornian response out there, since we do have...
Well, not seeing anything in the chat, but maybe somebody wants to jump in. As you're talking about that, Daniel, the thought that comes to mind about how, say the Capricorn as the empire builder, and corporate, building the corporation or creating that, so if the rules or the content has been that your business is successful if you make a certain amount of money, or like the markers for what that looks like has been defined by what the culture says that looks like, rather than from the place of maybe the essence of Capricorn that would actually care about the earth and would actually care about how things are working for everybody, not just for their business or for their empire. And that we've kind of lost that, and that there's a certain integrity that would be that that is like reclaiming that, I guess, maybe as part of what Capricorn is doing now.
When I make that comment about, in a very simple way, your rising sign will let you know what the main question in your life is. So Cancer rising, where are your children? Which could also mean where are your clients, or where are your students?
What are your projects that you get to nurture care of? Yeah.
Right. But with Capricorn, when we say, where's your empire, that's a little tricky to use that word. It's really like, where is your domain of responsibility? What is the project you're structuring? You know, what are you taking on, which that you then are taking responsibility for, that is like your own, which is like an empire.
Right, but with the far-sighted vision of how that's impacting in the generations to come, which is the piece that's missing from Capricorn currently, as we see it expressing through these big corporations and so on that haven't really cared, and although I do think that is changing, because there are some that do, but the bottom line has been, how much money do we make, and how do we do that, and we don't care.
Yeah, and I think the solution is in looking at and remembering that originally Capricorn is not patriarchal. It's it's based upon Mother Goddess. The planet Earth is a living being, and looking at how she sustains us, and then working together with her. So that's why I like the regular Capricorn today is such an aberration. It's the lowest common denominator, which are the minefields or the shadow of each mystery school, are generally, I mean, quite frankly, what the sun sign descriptions are. I mean, often the sun sign descriptions are the shadow expression that has taken place for the last couple thousand years. So Capricorn is, well, of course it's about the survival of the corporation and the quarterly profits. I mean, of course it's, once you have a bureaucracy, the only thing left in the bureaucracy is its own will to survive, that just perpetuate itself over time. I mean, that's the shadow of it, but the essence is, wow. Let's actually have something that works, which would mean that true Capricorn would be like coming up with a free energy, coming up with some sort of gravitational device. That's sort of like how Aquarius and Capricorn can work together. Innovating Capricorn, but something that works for everybody. One of my favorite examples of this, the Saturn-based triple Cancer. So it's like representing the best of Cancer and Capricorn, was one of my heroes from the 60s and 70s, Buckminster Fuller, whose entire life was dedicated toward everything he thought about was how we could make it work for everybody on the planet, and using technology and vision for that. Anyway, that's a good. I should have put him up as a list. By the way, I love it that people. I noticed that somebody sent in a picture, which they were wanting to illustrate Cancer, I think.
Well, no, I don't know that was the case, but this was Katie, who has been in Ecuador for the last few weeks, and so she had sent, and I had posted some of them in the one of the previous handouts, and this was just an incredibly beautiful picture, so I wanted to share it with everybody.
Well, that looks to me like a maybe in the United States might be like in the early 1800s, going out in the wilderness
this house right here.
Yeah, right. I can see that Cancerian part of it, as well as the power of the living Earth there. That's,
yeah, absolutely. So.
And I have like a whole list of different songs and movies that I could have thought of for some of the other mystery schools. I had a little bit harder time thinking of Cancer and Capricorn. Certain specific Capricorn songs, Cancer songs. So please, everybody, try to contribute on that. We can make a comprehensive list of what you come up with as far as images and stories and movies, both representing the shadow as well as the more progressive expression of it. And I put one song in there that is probably one of the more compelling songs regarding the downside, the shadow of Capricorn.
And that is? Which one?
Oh, Epitaph.
Right. Okay.
And then the one called One Time is a Capricorn moon song, like Anyway, I won't sing it. All right.
Maybe we can find that on YouTube or something. Yeah, it would be great to create a more comprehensive list. I think of that movie, The Game with Michael Douglas. That really was sort of a Pluto initiation, but he plays this character who is highly successful, but very unhappy and very impersonal, and goes through this, and then he's given for his birthday this opportunity to play this game, and then he goes through like a whole Pluto thing that when he's on the other side of it, he's developed a whole different side to himself. So that might be something that would be interesting for people to see as a expression of stuck Capricorn that gets liberated. Anyway, so Emma's saying, looking at the charts of those who have commented in the handout, she sees that most of them have talked about the relationship to a parent the same way that she did. If the Capricorn energy is strong, should one be working on learning to express feelings in a more personal way?
Which chart is she referring to? Excuse me, I missed that.
Just for the people that made a comment, did the exercise and commented on, through the different people that are in this handout. She's looking through those and she's noticing that many of them commented on a relationship to a parent as their comment.
And so, and again, what the question on that being?
Capricorn energy is strong. Should one be working on learning to express feelings in a more personal way?
Oh, I see. Yeah. So whether it's in a personal relationship or whether it's in a relationship with our parents, I think this is what I was alluding to before, that if a person is a parent, or if a person is a child who needs a parent in that hierarchical sense, that there's a certain point where you individuate away from that vertical hierarchical relationship, and you would individuate away from it. I mean, probably the most, I know I didn't quite answer about developing emotional, but this is, I think, more basic. So it kind of refers to something that is biblical, where at a certain point, Jesus tells the disciples, your parents are not your parents, your family is not your family, which then is, of course, over-literalized. Well, I'm not going to ever talk to them again. I'm going to say goodbye to my family. A lot of these things get over-literalized. Occasionally, it is necessary to do that if the bonds are too deep. So to shift to another level. So you form a relationship between you and your children that's not hierarchical anymore. It becomes more horizontal, and usually the way that would look is through being honored if you're a mother, being honored for your Venus rather than for your mother role. If you're a father, being honored for your Mars rather than for your father role. So one example would be, depending on the individual chart, which would be to develop personal feelings. But see, the problem with both Cancer and Capricorn is that when you're playing the role of hierarchy, the provider of nourishment, or the all-knowing teacher, or the elder senex who holds it together, neither one has room for personal vulnerability. I mean, usually the personal vulnerability only happens for those two mystery schools when the responsibilities are so overwhelming that the person just falls apart. They can't hold it together. They're drained. They're overutilized. They take on too much responsibility. And so then that forces on them vulnerability. So I always like to say that for Cancer, particularly at different stages of life, you have an opportunity at different stages of life to shift into a different version of it. Healthy Cancer is when there's an exact equality in giving and receiving, where basically when you give, you are feeling valued by giving. as opposed to it's expected and assumed that you just have an infinite amount of energy to give. Whether you're in a relationship, or whether you're doing this with one of your kids, or whether you're doing it in a profession, in a job, if you are feeling drained, if you're not feeling nourished by giving, then it may be time to look at changing what you're doing. You know, that's the universe of giving back the clues that that if you're drained, maybe you should check something else out for you to give to. You know. An example I will sometimes give, this may not apply to everybody, but I think and it's kind of odd for me to be saying this, being a male here, but virtually all of my clients are women, almost all these days. So I've heard this, you know. So if a woman has a child in the first couple of years, this is classic Cancer, in the first couple of years it doesn't matter that much if you only sleep a few hours, because there's a feeling of so much value and coming back. You give, and you give love, and you receive love back. That changes later on.
Especially when they're teenagers. Right. Well, you know, Daniel, also you're bringing up something that I think is interesting, and that is that I know that my parents came across all-knowing parents. Like whatever they thought was right and should happen was it. And there was no questioning of that. But that wasn't true. And I knew it wasn't true as a kid, so of course I always argued with them. But and so maybe perhaps as we're moving into new Cancer, Capricorn, is looking at the, you know, how do we do this in a way where, especially as the children get older and can have an opinion and have something to say that is of value, that's also brought into the story.
Well, yeah. See, it's really questioning deeply the way in which the hierarchical roles have been held, and we have to kind of make it up fresh, but to not lose contact with what the essence of these two mystery schools are. There will always be the need to have one of the schools be addressing the issue of how do we provide nourishment in a healthy way, how to tell that it's been long enough, you know, how to shift it to something different, how to make sure that the person who's doing Cancer can determine and tell when they're overdoing it, and where it might be necessary to be a little bit more selfish and say, wait a minute, you know, I'm not just, if I give everything and that I'm drained and I'm not getting any value back, there isn't anybody out there that's going to be giving you additional strokes because you've sacrificed yourself that way. You know, I mean, that's a part of the problem with some of these mystery schools. You know, like service is its own reward. You know, but in some ways, but I'm not saying there's no truth to some of that, but the Sisyphus story can apply to both Cancer and Capricorn. You know, you're rolling the stone up the hill every day, crashes down. On a good day, the person who rolls the stone up the hill says, well, somebody's got to do this. One can only imagine on a bad day how that is. You know, it's called the cultural definition of insanity. And you know, God is not about to give you a reward for it if you've done it so far and so long that you're actually expecting a different result.
Emma says thank you. That helped clear up her quandary. And Judith is asking if you could talk about Pluto and Capricorn.
Well, the usefulness of looking at Pluto in a sign is that it actually describes over periods of time. I mean, Pluto will take a good number of years. Sometimes it'll take longer to go through certain signs than other signs. During the 30s, it was going through Cancer. Now it's going through Capricorn. usually the sign that Pluto is demonstrating, clearly articulating to us where the shadow of that particular mystery school is. I mean, that's how this would be, how that could be used. You know, so we say if we're in a Pluto and Capricorn time, Pluto is trying to show global humanity that Capricorn needs to be really, really ground into the soil and spread to the wind and have another one arise. I mean, what we've seen as Capricorn up to this point is not healthy for the planet. And we can look at Pluto going through every sign in the same way. Pluto through Sagittarius, fundamentalism. Pluto through Leo is the classic example of the narcissistic me first, the me generation kind of thing. Pluto and Virgo generation is that extreme nihilism and negativism, that there's nothing has any sacredness, nothing has any value, and I'm giving you like really short little expressions of it, but it's a good question because Pluto's placement in a sign is clearly emphasizing where those minefields or where the shadow expression is of the mystery school. Now this brings up an interesting point that I want to get out, which is that there is a subtle difference between the minefield or the shadow and what I like to call an honest mistake. I mean, an honest mistake is where an individual is actually investigating the essence of a mystery school, and then because they're a beginner, because they haven't been there before, they can end up, is what we do when we practice. We take it too far. I mean, we'll see many, many examples of this when we go through the ones that are more obvious here, which would be like Leo or Taurus or Scorpio, the honest mistakes that have to do with going past the edge. Because one wants to find out where the sweetness of life is or the passion of life is. And for these two, the shadow expression, the going too far, is like with Capricorn, taking on too much responsibility, believing that you're ultimately responsible for the whole thing. And then with Cancer, being overgiving, and not wanting to let go of your function. I think both Cancer and Capricorn have as their shadow this over-identification with one's function, but then the essence also includes that they have a function. Sometimes we can look at this like from the perspective of the moon, like what is the core reality of a person when they come, like what, I'm a Capricorn moon, all right, so first thought that happens when I wake up in the morning, or it's the thought that's there when I can't go to sleep, all right, it's like, you got to have it together. You have to know what it is you're talking about. I mean, it's like something that's like built into that mystery school. And it's not just something that can be perceived of as some kind of parental neurosis. It's like part of what that mystery school had been about. Yeah, if you're the captain of the ship, you'd have to know what you're doing. If you're the teacher, yeah, you're supposed to know what you're talking about. I mean, people could be hurt if you didn't know what you were doing. So that's the identification. And of course, that's where the over-identification is. The same way Cancer Moon, my job is to take care of these kids. If I don't do it, then I mean, gosh, the greatest irresponsibility for Cancer would be having a kid and a year later saying you changed your mind. That it is really a responsibility of providing nourishment. But then you can go too far. I mean, I can have some really extreme examples of this. An old friend of mine with 4 kids. And those kids were in their mid-20s and late 20s. 4 kids took the mother aside and said, Mom, we don't want to have anything more to do with you ever again. Essentially, the 4 kids fired her, right? And this woman had enough clarity, enough savvy to realize why it happened. She had over-involved herself in their lives. She had not allowed them to become adults. I mean, these are just riffing here on these examples, but hopefully this is, you know, capturing the essence of these mystery schools, and will hopefully help in clarifying and understanding these mystery schools.
Yeah. And so any other questions or comments or anything out there? And you can unmute yourself. If you're on the phone, I think *6 will unmute you. If you're on the line, you can just click the little microphone on your name. So we've got just a few more minutes if people want to say anything. I'm not getting anything, Daniel, so...
Let me see. Okay, so what else could we bring up here? I will prepare a formatter, you know, just to sort of capture some of these points as far as other ways of inquiry, other ways of exploration when we get to Aries and Libra in 2 weeks, and as we go through these different ones. We had, it's interesting that, well, we did actually hear from a couple of the Cancer ascendants. We didn't hear from any of the Capricorn ascendants, which interestingly are 3 men.
So here's something that says, it's interesting that I have no Cancer or Capricorn on my chart, and perhaps from that distance, these 2 rising signs seem fairly straightforward to me. That's from Terry.
Yes.
Yeah.
And actually, her point is a really good one. You know, usually when I've taught this class in the past in our 5-day intensives, you might remember, Cayelin, that I almost always, this would be the ending one. You know, Cancer and Capricorn at the end. These are, particularly Cancer, these are the ones everybody thinks they know what they are. You know, they're the real foundational building blocks of the world. And having said that, in the assumption that we all know what they are, then we lose track of the fact that probably more so in these 2, maybe equally Libra, we lose track with this difference between essence and content. You know, we just assume it's supposed to be a nuclear family, or mothers are supposed to behave a particular way, or you know, there's more revolution actually needed in these mystery schools than in the ones that are more obviously revolutionary ones.
And then there's also the challenge of people who are learning about it as opposed to those who already know something about it.
Right.
So Ron is asking a question.
Yes, I missed that. Go ahead.
Yeah, what does it mean when a planet falls in Capricorn or Cancer and is retrograde? That's kind of a complicated answer.
Well, first of all, and I don't know if we just covered this in the during the script. The only retrogrades that are really worth putting a lot of attention on are the retrogrades of the inner planets, Venus, Mercury, and Mars. The reason for that is the outer planets are retrograde in some cases nearly half of the year. So it's not a really unique or individualistic factor. The retrogrades of Venus, Mercury, and Mars is a really huge story, which we have actually our whole training on synodic cycles and also the timeline, where we go into that to a certain extent. for the purpose of what we're doing here in this class, I wouldn't be concerned about that right now. We're emphasizing here the nature of the mystery schools and of the archetypes and how it fits into the script. And that, by the way, it also there's no relevance whatsoever to retrograde or direct of the nodes. I mean, for a long period of time, the only tables that were available was the so-called mean node, and it's never retrograde. Then they came up with the true node, which was just a slightly different way of calculating it. That would show retrogrades in there, but I have never seen any meaning, or any particularly important thing to attach to that.
Well, and the nodes are retrograde because they move backwards anyway. And so if they're direct, it's actually the opposite of what they normally are,
Right.
Which is interesting. And the other thing about, just to kind of follow up on what you're saying, Daniel, is that if any of the personal planets are retrograde, it doesn't add enough additional meaning, especially if you were doing a first-time reading for somebody or first looking at a chart, to it's still going to be the same meaning. It's still the same archetype that person is working on, if it's their Venus and their emerging feminine, or it's their Mars and their emerging masculine, or their Mercury, how they think. So the to understand it in the context of the synodic cycle gives additional information, but it's not necessary to the understanding.
Right.
Yeah.
And I thought of one other thing, Cayelin. It was that last question that was sent in to us, where there was that big aha a person had regarding oppositions.
That was Rhonda, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So so that's just to really solidify that. That is why we're doing these classes in pairs, to really get a great sense of the polarity, what we call resonant polarity, rather than using the word opposition. Resonant polarity, that there's Cancer and Capricorn, as different as they are, have more in common than not. They're actually like two sides of the same coin. So we have the Cancer Capricorn axis here, and then so next class it'll be the Aries Libra axis. The foundational understanding of an opposition.
Mm-hmm.
Very good.
Yeah, so unless there's anything else, and I'm not seeing anything else, I think we are complete.